Night will be over feeding the multitudes. It is recorded in, we're looking at the 5,000 and the 4,000. 5,000 recorded in all four Gospels, and 4,000's nearly all of them. So we'll be bouncing. Can I get a little more volume in the back? I can't talk much louder than this. Sorry. I got a drainage in my voice. I'm doing great to get there. Can you hear me? Good? Okay. Sorry. So we'll be bouncing around all four of the Gospels, mostly in Matthew and Mark, but we will be looking everywhere. So if you're trying to follow along at home, I appreciate it, but it could be difficult. So Jesus performed many miracles. Many we're told about, many we're not. Some miracles he did for a small crowd, just one or two, like the money in the fish's mouth. Some of them he performed in front of thousands, like when he fed thousands of people. What was the purpose of miracles, though? To confirm who he was, to prove who he was, show proof to the people. Sorry. And Mark chapter 6. We'll be in Mark 6 a lot. Verse 30. The apostles gathered themselves together unto Jesus and told him all things, both what they had done and what they had taught. So the apostles have been out on their respective missionary journeys. They're coming back to report to Jesus, this is what we've done, this is what's going on. And they're having trouble doing it because Jesus is being flocked by the multitudes because of the miracles that he is performing. And he said unto them, that is the apostles, continuing in verse 31, Come ye yourselves apart into a desert place and rest a while, for there were many coming and going, and they had no leisure so much as to eat, and departed unto a desert place by ship privately. They didn't have enough time to eat. The multitudes were flocking them so terribly. So they're trying to give this report and trying to sit down. They just all returned from their journeys, and they can't. The multitudes are too persistent. So they get on a boat and they go off into the plain near the city of Bethsaida Julius. That's from Luke chapter 9. They thought they were going to get to be alone for a little while. Well, Jesus didn't. He knew the multitudes were going to follow him. But the intent was to be alone for a little while. So they took off by boat to this plain near Bethsaida. And the multitude figured out where they were going. They just took the same route that the boat took. Well, around. They wouldn't have gone through the water. But they went to the same plain to follow Jesus again. Luke chapter 9. And the people, when they knew it, followed him and received them and spake unto them the kingdom of God and healed them that had need of healing. So many of the people that were following him were sick. Some just wanted to hear him speak. Some just wanted to see him. Some of them were sick or had sick relatives. And that's why they were following. Each member of the multitude was following for their own reasons. But Jesus had compassion upon them and healed those that needed it. Back to Mark chapter 6, verse 34 now. And Jesus, when he came out, saw much people, and was moved with compassion toward them, because they were as sheep not having a shepherd, and he began to teach to them many things. So they went to the plain to try to get away. That didn't work. So then they went up on a mountain. That didn't work either. But Jesus had compassion on those people that would absolutely not leave him alone to let him accomplish the business he was trying to do. And he saw them and had compassion on them. The reference to the sheep not having a shepherd is interesting, because this group here would have been predominantly Jews. So their teachers would have been the Sadducees and Pharisees. And their jobs were, anybody?
Shepherd.
The shepherd, specifically their role in the Jewish people, though. The scribes and Pharisees would have been the lawmakers and then the actual writers of the scribes, the writers of the law, right? These are the people that have been teaching them what they're supposed to be doing. The average person wouldn't have been able to read, which is probably the vast majority of these people are common people. This is near the time of the Passover, so all the Jews are having to come now. And so you have these multitudes of people flocking in, many of which I'm sure are having to come near these places where he is, so they're just making a stop as a matter of convenience. But they're like sheep without a shepherd, because of all the people that should know, the Sadducees or scribes and Pharisees should have known better who Jesus was than anybody. But they like their positions of power so much that they refused to admit it, and they would eventually kill Jesus instead of admit who he was. So these sheep without a shepherd, because the shepherds that they were supposed to have been leading them wrong the entire time, because they refused to acknowledge the truth, which of all people they should have known best. Matthew chapter 14, starting verse 15. And when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, "This is a desert place, and the time is now past. Send the multitude away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves victuals." But Jesus said unto them, "They need not depart. Give them to eat." Luke says the day began to wear away. Mark records it as the day was now far spent. And Matthew says the evening was come. Regardless, they're in the middle of the desert, and nobody has food. Jesus' response is very interesting here. The disciples say, "Hey, we've got all these people. Nobody has any food. Send them home so they can go get something to eat." And Jesus looks back at them after they just said, "We don't have any food." And Jesus says, "You don't have to send them away. Feed them." The test of faith immediately. There's no solution given here. He just simply says, feed them. It's something that he repeats often. I mean, he asked, what did he tell Peter 3 times after his resurrection? Feed my sheep. Feeding the flock, shepherding the flock is what he's doing, but he's telling these leaders, these men, some of which were elders, to feed the people, feed the flock. And they couldn't figure it out. Now remember, the apostles hadn't had time to eat since they had started trying to meet with Jesus. They've gone in 3 different places and none of it's worked. They're trying to still get away. They haven't had the opportunity to eat yet either. So they're also hungry. And they have no food either, which is... John chapter 6, starting verse 5. When Jesus lifted up his eyes and saw a great company come unto them, he saith unto Philip, Whence shall we buy bread that these may eat? And he said it to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 pennyworth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little. So John records it that he specifically looked at Philip and said, where can we get this food? So he turns to him. They say we need to send them away. He said, no, we don't need to send them away. Feed them. And John specifically records that he turns to Philip and says, where can we get enough bread for these people? And the apostles' response is, we're in the middle of the desert, Lord. Where do you expect to get us to get bread for you? Firstly, and second of all, even if we could get bread for people in the middle of the desert, then how are we going to pay for it? This 200 pennyworth that he mentions here is the common person would have been about 7 months' worth of wages. So even 7 months' worth of wages is not enough to feed all of these people. Which we're looking at, it records it as 5,000 men besides women and children. So a conservative guess would be 10,000 people. That's a lot of bread. So they're looking at the logistics of it. And Jesus knows that, because Jesus specifically asked them, already knowing what he was about to do. He said it to them, and this he said to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. Continue in John chapter 6. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, saith unto him, There's a lad here which has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes. But what are they among so many? Even the apostles didn't have any food. The only person that has any food is one small boy. He's brought 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Now these loaves wouldn't have been nice, fluffy loaves of bread from Walmart. They would have very likely been something that you could easily pack. This lad's mom, I'm sure, packed his meal. He went off. So he's probably think more along the size of communion. I mean, unleavened bread, basically. Crackers that he could take easily with him. I mean, what young lad would need 5 loaves of bread for lunch for himself? So he's looking at small crackers. So they're not even big loaves to stretch along. He's got two fish. These fish were probably sardines because you could salt them and preserve them whole, and then you would just basically take one bite and they're gone. That was your protein for the trip. So, I mean, you're looking at teeny tiny fish and small pieces of bread. And that's all that this thousands of people, including Jesus and the apostles, have. Mark 6 again, verse 39. And he commanded them to make all sit down by companies upon the green grass, and they sat down in ranks by hundreds and fifties. John chapter 6. And Jesus said, make the men sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. So he had them sit down in an organized fashion. This would help logistically. Just trying to get everyone food that's in a meal. And when we pass communion here, we're in an ordered fashion, so it's fairly easy to logistically get everyone fed. But also this would ensure that everyone was fed, but could also see the miracle being performed. I said, again, this number is given as 5,000 men besides women and children, so safe guess would be at least 10,000, probably more. John chapter 6, verse 11. Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed to the disciples, and the disciples to them that were set down, and likewise the fishes, as much as they would. Jesus sits down, offers thanks for the meal, just like we would, and he starts handing out these 5 loaves and 2 fishes to his disciples who are going to assist in distributing them, however many in number they were. Can you imagine what that would have looked like? I mean, you're sitting there with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and he just starts handing them out, and it never changes. He's always got 5 loaves and 2 fishes, no matter how much he hands out. Like, what does that do? Like, how do you register that? So it starts there. Not only that, but once the disciples and the apostles start passing them out, they're doing the same thing. They're just constantly, they always have food, no matter how much they pull out. Each person of these thousands and thousands of people not only gets fed, but they get fed as much as they would. Each person gets all the food they want to fill their bellies. Matthew chapter 14, starting at verse 20. And they did all eat, and were filled, and they took up the fragments that remained, 12 baskets full. And they that were eaten were about 5,000 men, besides the women and children. So he went from 5 loaves to 2 fishes, which probably wouldn't have taken up the bottom of 1 basket. Now he's got 12 baskets of leftovers after everyone's done eating. Just to multiply it to 12 baskets would have been impressive. But that's the leftovers that came from this 5 loaves and 2 fishes. John chapter 6, verse 14. Then those men, when they had seen the miracle that Jesus did, said, this is of a truth that prophet that should come into the world. Can someone grab Deuteronomy 18:15 for me? Deuteronomy 18:15. Just whoever gets it.
Verse 15.
Yes, sir.
The Lord your God will raise up to you a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers, and to him you shall listen.
That prophet that should come into the world. These common people, thousands of people, see this one miracle. And they are able and willing to confess who Jesus is. Right there. Now, they've been following, and they've seen plenty of miracles prior to that as well. It's the same multitude that's been following at least this whole day. We don't know how long prior to this they've been following him. But so they've seen these miracles, but they see this feeding, and this is the point where they get to it. And I said these people who couldn't read, who would have had to have been told the law by others, the same people that refused to admit who Jesus is. But these common people know enough of the law that's been told to them by the scribes and Pharisees that they can even recognize who Jesus is. It is the prophet that Moses had promised that God would bring into the world. Of Of course, the people go on to want to make Jesus an earthly king, which was never the plan. His plan was and is to establish his kingdom, which is our church, and reign with it forever. Excuse me. But I just find that very interesting, that these common people would be willing to just, this is the prophet, this is Jesus, this is our king that we've been looking for. But the people who are the law writers and the law givers refuse to admit it. The same people who are telling these people what it was. Any questions or thoughts on the 5,000? Yes, sir. Yeah, we said, go feed them. And they're like, specifically looked at Philip and said, where can we get bread for this? Also, if you want to get a little deeper into that, then the numbers of completion or perfection in prophetic language is 7, 10, and 12, right? 12 baskets would be a complete number, a perfect number. So you're talking to Jews here. The entire crowd is Jews. So you've also collected all of it. There's one for each members of the apostles to be able to see it and to hold it, but it's also the complete, it's the perfect number for, just in the prophetic language. Anything else on the 5? And we'll move to the 4. Turn over just a little bit. Instead of Matthew 14, let's look at Matthew 15. Matthew chapter 15, verse 29 beginning. And Jesus departed from thence, and came nigh unto the Sea of Galilee, and went up to a mountain, and sat down there. And great multitudes came unto him, having with them those that were lame, blind, dumb, maimed, and many others, and cast them down at Jesus' feet, and he healed them, insomuch that the multitudes wondered, when they saw the dumb speak, the maimed behold, and the lame to walk, and the blind to see, that they glorified the God of Israel. Now, we noted about the first crowd that followed him. That crowd would have been primarily Jewish. But immediately before this 4,000, there's a woman that comes to Jesus asking for her daughter to be healed. She is not Jewish. She's a Canaanite. And at first, he wouldn't even answer her. And when the disciples said, send her away, he said, I'm not sent unto the lost sheep, but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So at this point, he's still just with the Jews. The Great Commission has not occurred yet. It's not for everyone. Still trying to get the Jews, the first to convert. This woman comes up who is a Canaanite, not a Jew. So he responds, I am not sent, verse 24, I'm not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And she came and worshipped him anyway. And he said, it is not meet to take the children's bread and cast it to dogs. And the woman replied, Truth, Lord, yet the dogs eat crumbs which fall from their master's table. Jesus answered and said unto her, O woman, great is thy faith. Be it unto thee, even as thou wilt. And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. So it was all Jews. Now we've got starting a mix. And his location of where he's going, which he was in Tyre and Sidon when this woman came up. But now he's probably starting to attract a little bit different crowd than just Jews. So he's probably getting some Gentiles in this crowd as well by the time we get to 4,000. Speculation. I said especially when we get this woman coming up and his geographic location. Probably not just Jews in this crowd. the two accounts of the 5,000 and 4,000 are very interesting because they're almost identical. They're clearly two different events because the Lord refers to them shortly after feeding the 4,000 as two separate events, and their details are different, but the circumstances are almost identical. The multitudes are still flocking him for the same reasons. He's still performing the same miracles on the same types of people. And once again, everyone forgets to bring food. But it's interesting that the faith of these people is what's causing them to follow him. If they didn't believe, they didn't have faith who he was, these common people who just proclaimed Jesus as the prophet that was prophesied to come, they know, and they're following him. Their faith is so great, they're willing to follow him without any preparation, no food, no nothing. And we'll contrast that with the prophets here momentarily. As we've already noticed, whenever he tested the prophets, he said, well, feed them. And they couldn't figure out what was going on. Yes, sir?
You're emphasizing the faith of these people who are following without bringing anything to eat. What strikes me is the disciple we just referenced a moment ago that assisted in handing out the 12 baskets to 5,000, when they're confronted with the exact same question here, where are we going to get bread to feed these people?
So we're about to contrast the faith of the people who are willing to follow him without food versus the apostles who, just like you said, just had this hands-on. Each one of them would have had a basket, as Chris pointed out. And they can't figure out one chapter later. They've only gone to, 2 other places? They went to Tyre and Sidon, and now they're going across the Sea of Galilee again. I mean, we're not looking at a long time at all. Within the same week, if not just a couple of days of each other. And they've already... But the people are willing to follow. But the apostles can't figure it out. Matthew 15, starting at 32 this time. Then Jesus called his disciples unto him and said, I have compassion on the multitude, because they continue with me now 3 days, and I have nothing to eat. And I will not send them away fasting, lest they faint in the way. And his disciples say unto him, Whence shall we have so much bread in the wilderness, as to fill so great a multitude? I feel like he should have just turned back to Philip and said, Where can we find bread for these people? I wonder if his answer would have been the same. Not even 200 pennyworth would be. Even if we could find bread in the desert, Lord, not even 200 pennyworth. I mean, how do they not hear themselves? But these people have gone for 3 days. We don't know how much food they started off with, but some of them probably didn't have any to begin with. But regardless, at the end of 3 days, they're so hungry and so tired out in the desert that Jesus is afraid that they'll pass out and faint if he tries to send them home. And what harm could befall them then? These people have followed him under extreme circumstances because of their faith. Clearly. I mean, how many of those people that came to Jesus to hear him speak and to see him, how many people that came to see him couldn't see him before he worked a miracle on them? How many people were blind that just wanted to see Jesus, and he healed them so they could see him? How many people that came to hear him could not hear until he healed them, and they could hear his sermons? How many people couldn't walk to get to him, but they walked home? These people, of course, had great faith. I mean, can you imagine? All you want to do is hear Jesus and hear him speaking, this man, and you're healed, and you're able to hear him, able to hear the lessons. Or you've heard this about this great man, but you can't see him. You'll never lay eyes on him because you're blind. And he says, well, be healed. And you see him. No hesitation. Or you've had to ride, family members had to bring you to see him, and you get to walk home. Of course these people had great faith. And that's why they were so willing to believe him. It's because of their faith, like we said, that they're here. Matthew chapter 15, verse 34. And Jesus said to them, How many loaves have ye? And they said, 7, and a few little fishes. They've actually got more bread and fishes to feed less people, and they still can't figure it out. So remember verse 33, disciples said unto him, Whence shall we have so much bread to feed Let me start that over again. And his disciples say unto him, Whence should we have so much bread in the wilderness as to fill so great a multitude? Jesus said unto them, How many loaves have you? And they said, 7, and a few little fishes. And he commanded the multitude to sit on the ground. Sounding familiar? And the apostles are still going, I don't get it. These people have followed him to the point of exhaustion because they believe in him. Because they believe that Jesus will not let harm come to them. And the apostles are still the ones going, boom. Let's go through 38, starting at 35. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves and fishes, and gave thanks, and brake them, and gave to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. Sound familiar? And they did all eat and were filled. And they took up the broken meat that was left, 7 baskets full. And they that did eat were 4,000 men, besides women and children. So if it's 4,000 men, and again, a safe guess would probably be at least double that. So he's feeding at least 8,000 people here, likely more. I mean, at what point do you think it hits the disciples? Do you think it's when he's saying the prayer or whenever they're collecting the food back into the baskets again? And when do you think it hits them? What kind of an aha, whoops, I'm an idiot moment did it take for them? These people who just for this piece of their life get to see Jesus. The apostles are following him for a long time compared to these people. These people see him for a few days. The apostles are with him for months and years. So, and these people can see it before the apostles do. In my high school class, middle high school class, pointed out, how can they be that dense? Which is an excellent question. I mean, they had Jesus right there in front of them. A couple of days ago, had just fed 5,000 plus, 10,000 people probably. The 5,000 men. Now we're sitting here in a smaller company with more food, and I just don't know how we're going to feed all these people. They said, how can they be that dense? I said, well, we like to think that if we had Jesus right beside us, that we wouldn't be that dense either. But these same 12 men are the same ones that as soon as Jesus is arrested, disappear completely. Nobody stands up for him. Peter cursing and swearing, I never knew the man, 3 times. All of them lost their faith when Jesus was arrested and crucified. And they had him, like I said, for years. Saw miracles we will never read about. And they still couldn't figure it out. Adam and Eve walked alone in the garden with God. They had one job. And they were told not to do one thing. And they're like, look at that. And ate the fruit. The rich man and Lazarus, the rich man says, just let someone come back from the dead, my brothers will believe. Just like these people will soon have. We have the same man that came back from the dead. Jesus come back from the dead. And just like he said, even if they have the laws of the prophets, if they won't believe them, then they're not going to listen to even someone coming back from the dead. And we have that man that came back from the dead. And yet here we sit knowing better, and we still mess up. Yes, brother.
You're saying that the young people thought it didn't seem credible that they were having such a difficult time believing. I'll just make this observation as we critique the disciples. We rarely dream anymore. We hardly ever implement any plans anymore. And the reason we don't is because unless we can count the denarii and say, we have what we can see
we'll get more into we're going to look at little further on when he starts questioning the apostles' faith, which he does embarrassingly frequently for them. But how often will they question our faith, like you said? The apostles are sitting here with no food in their hands. You're talking about we have the denarii in our hands, so at least we have something. When they fed the 5,000, the apostles had absolutely nothing in their hands. And he looks at them and says, feed them. Feed my sheep. That's our job. That's our great commission. And he told the apostles to do it when they had absolutely nothing. God provides the increase. All we can do is the labor.
We just hand out the baskets and pick up the fragments. He does all the blessing and distributing.
So we have 5 loaves and 2 fishes. He's the one that starts making sure it moves around.
Exactly.
Well, and that's the one thing that he had that they didn't have. He had compassion for the multitude.
Yes.
So just like he does the rest of the day.
Which is an excellent parallel because, how many times are we beyond that 70 times 7 that we're supposed to forgive our brother? It's a rhetorical number. How many times should we forgive our brother? How many times we get frustrated and lose compassion? We see somebody on the street, well, it's their fault. Somebody messes up, someone makes us mad in the church, and we're like, get out of here. And God sent his son, this man who had compassion on the multitudes, to die for the least of these people. These common people who are actually willing to admit that Jesus is the prophet that was to be sent. They're the shining example. Jesus came for Barabbas, the man that was released instead of him. Jesus came for Paul, who was slaughtering Christians. Came for me. And what have I done? I'm glad he has that compassion and allows me to keep struggling through my faith to get there, So once again, he offers a thanks for the meal. They pass it out. Every single person in the multitude, he has them sit down again, which so logistically would have made it easier, and also would have made sure everyone saw the miracle. Then he offers a thanks and begins to pass out this loaves and fish that never end. And they take it up, and they have fewer people, so they have fewer baskets. But interestingly, like we said, 12 being one of the numbers of completion, now we have 7 baskets, which is also a perfect number, and a number of completion using prophetic language. These 2 instances differ very little. The only difference between these 2 accounts is how many people they had to feed, or how many men there were. We have no idea what the actual total number was, but how many men there was, 5,000 versus 4,000. The amount of food, we had 5 loaves and 2 fishes versus 7 loaves and some fishes. And then the number of baskets collected with leftovers, that's 12 versus 7 of the 2 different sized crowds. If someone wants to turn to Mark 18, we'll look at verse 14 through 21. Mark's going to be hard to get to. I said 8. Sorry about that. Mark chapter 8, verses 14 through 21. Let's talk a little bit more about this faith that we were dumbfounded. Someone want to read 14 through 21 for me of Mark chapter 8?
14 through what?
21.
Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, neither had they in the ship with them more than 1 loaf. And he charged them, saying, Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of Herod. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, It is because we have no bread. And when Jesus knew it, he saith unto them, Why reason ye, because ye have no bread? Perceive ye not yet, neither understand? Have ye your heart yet hardened? Having eyes, see ye not? And having ears, hear ye not? And do ye not remember? When I break the 5 loaves among 5,000, how many basketful of fragments took ye up?
You can almost feel the frustration in Jesus' words on this page here. Now, they fed the 4,000, and straightway, verse 10 is the next word, and straightway got on a ship and go to, I cannot even begin to pronounce Dalmatian on here. They go to another city, and the Pharisees are sitting there waiting on them, which we've talked about in class with Chris. Give us a sign, give us a sign, give us a sign. He said, why does this generation seek a sign? Verily I say to you, there will be no sign given to this generation. And he left them, entering into the ship to depart the other side. Jesus just had to feed the 5,000 because they wouldn't leave him alone. Now he's fed the 4,000, they wouldn't leave him alone. Now he gets on a ship trying to get away from that multitude. Now the Pharisees are there like dogs at the end of their chains, won't leave him alone. So they get on the ship again and head out again, and he just tries to give them a warning. Just be wary. Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of Herod. And now remember, he just stretched a total of, 7 and 5, so 12 loaves. He just stretched 12 loaves between 9,000 men plus women and children in 2 different instances. It's interesting to me now that they're concerned about their bread. I mean, how many times? It's bread, still bread. It's not like they changed subject material here. And he says, beware of the leaven, the man who's spoken to them in parables for all this time. And he's the first thing they think about, they're like, he's good. He knows we didn't bring any bread again. Like, the lack of faith that we look at here. And like you said, we mock them, and we're sitting here kicking ourselves in the shin, doing the same thing. And you can hear Jesus is getting frustrated. Nobody will leave him alone. Nobody will listen to him. He said, why do you reason that you have no bread? Because you have no bread. Perceive you not, neither understand? Have you had your heart hardened? So you have eyes, have you not seen? You have ears, I know. But why are you not hearing? Can you not remember? I just fed 9,000 men with 12 loaves. And you're asking me about bread again. Really? So how is it that you do not understand the exasperation here? And he's blasting them for their faith. Well deserved. I mean, how is it that you don't remember? Matthew 16 is the same account. Starting at verse 5. I like the way he starts off as recorded in Matthew. He begins it, O ye of little faith, why reason among yourselves because ye have no bread? So he starts off blasting them. O ye of little faith, why do you have such little faith? And he clarifies, how is it that you now understand? Verse 11, that I spake it not to you concerning the bread, that you should beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And then they understood how he bade them not beware of the actual bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and Sadducees, which is those same people that have been teaching those commoners that have just confessed and realized who Jesus is. And the apostles are so thick that they can't see. Now they finally understand. Matthew 17:20. I mean, just after that, they try to cast out a demon, and they can't do it. Jesus walks up and says, arise, be not afraid. There you go, 17:20.
Try to note about Jesus' frustration with his apostles who received these miracles, even after his resurrection. Mm-hmm. He upbraided them because of their hardness of heart and unbelief. After having seen even witness the resurrection of the dead. But when we get down to chapter 2 and the Holy Spirit came, apparently it really sunk in with Peter. Jesus of Nazareth, he said, a man approved of God among you by miracles, wonders, signs, which God did by him in the midst of you, which ye yourself also know. He being delivered by the permanent counsel and foreknowledge of God, you have taken by wicked hands and crucified and slain, whom God hath raised up, and may loose the pains of death, but not possible for him to be holden of it. So he finally got it. And with the Holy Spirit coming to baptism on measure, give him the speech to speak. But they were slow, as we are slow.
It is encouraging, though. I mean, it's encouraging to see these idiots. to see how dense they start off. Because remember, these people would have been, most of them Jews. He walks up, gets his first 4, and just says, "Hey, y'all, come on." And they are like, "All right," stand up and walk off. So they would have known who he was, else they wouldn't have just followed him. That would have been kind of weird. So they clearly knew who he was, but all it took was for him to walk by and say, "Come on." So they started with some measure of faith to just everything they had, even Zebedee, their father, they just walked off and left him with their livelihood, everything. So, they had faith, but to see these people grow, we have to grow too. So to see where these people, where we look at them and go, "What are y'all doing? How can you be that dense?" And then you see them grow, and like you said, by the end of it, they're ready. They're out, and they see it. They've had okay, now they're able to stand strong, and they're able to see what's going on. They're able to stay strong. So it's encouraging to see that improvement can be made, and it's the same improvement we are trying to perform. Matthew 17:20 said the apostles are trying to cast a demon out of a boy. They can't do it, which I imagine was mightily embarrassing for the apostles. They're supposed to be out working these miracles, and they go up and they can't do it. We're not told if this was the first time they failed in a miracle or not, but this is the first time I believe that they're mentioned completely failing at what they attempted to do. So Jesus had to come up and do it himself. And his rebuke was, "O faithless," verse 17 of Matthew 17. "O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him here to me." So he was exasperated with them. Again, "O ye of little faith," saying almost the same thing over again. "Ye faithless and perverse generation." Speaking to his apostles. His response, after they asked him, they said, why couldn't we do this? Why couldn't we cast him out? Jesus said to them, "Because of your unbelief, for verily I say to you, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you shall say unto this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible to you. Howbeit this kind goeth out not by prayer, not out, but by prayer and fasting." And of course, Hebrews chapter 11, is you have the Hall of Fame for faith. It starts with the definition of faith and runs through the heroes of faith, whatever you want, a designation you want to give that chapter. It says what these people were able to do by faith. It's these incredible things, but you look at the apostles, who were, arguably should be the most steadfast people we have, and we're looking at them saying, where is your faith? The same thing Jesus asked them repeatedly, where is your faith? So even children, even the high schoolers and middle schoolers, I'm sure younger than that would be able to pick it up pretty quick. What were they doing? But we have the same miracles. We have the man that has risen from the dead. We have all of it. Now, what are we doing? I preached for our Devo at Camp in Agahey this summer. I preached the lesson that I did was talking about needing to respond. And I compared it. I started off, what does it mean if you can lead a horse to water, can't make it drink? Well, you can lead a horse to water and can't make it drink. I said, y'all are sharp. Then I went through a couple other examples, including a hot Krispy Kreme donut, and wound up at a man crawling through the desert. And you see him, and you're driving along in your nice air-conditioned car, and he's crawling through the desert, clearly next to death. And you've got this bottle of water in your car. It's nice and cold, sitting in the cooler. You grab the bottle of water, offer it to the man. All he's got to do is reach out and take it. The price has been paid. His life can be saved if only he will just take the water. But he won't take it. He refuses to take it. I said, what do y'all think of this man? And from the youngest at camp, which is, help me out, 9 years old? From the 9-year-old, well, we're at a senior Devo, so that's cheating a little bit. Still middle school. But from the youngest that we had in attendance through the oldest, all of them like, he's an idiot. He's crazy. He's out of his mind. I said, well, if you don't want to take the living water, if you don't want to take the word, the price is just like that bottle of water. The price has been paid. All you have to do is reach out and take it. If you refuse to do that, you are the man. And they're like, so even children can recognize how crazy it is. But these apostles are sitting here next to Jesus and they can't figure it out. So how are we the same, like you said, whenever we are laughing at these men and just can't believe how bad off they are? How are we any better whenever we say, well, we can't do that, or we don't need to try that, or if we fall away, we do something, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So we're the man. We're the apostles that we're sitting there laughing at for their complete lack of faith, that Jesus had to continually rebuke for their lack of faith. And we're just like them. But it is encouraging, as we've pointed out, that these apostles did grow and they did get to a point where they were able to walk on their own. They got past the milk, they got into the meat, and they were grown-up Christians that no longer required the milk of the Word. And we can see that, and we can use that as encouragement to understand that we can do the same thing, and we can have that faith as a mustard seed. Thank you for your time. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thoughts? Doug?